Greetings! It's another vintage bench tester on the test bench. Well, the scabby top dining room table. This is a Heathkit CM1U capacitance meter manufactured by Daystrom of Gloucester, this being a UK subsidiary of the larger Daystrom group which owned the Heathkit brand at the time. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail here. I'll put a link at the end of this video to a different channel which has covered the US version of this unit, the CM1. We can take a look inside and see some of the differences between the two models before I hand over. Daystrom came to Gloucester in late 1958, and the earliest advert I can find for the CM1U is in the September 1959 issue of Practical Wireless magazine, where it cost £14.10 in kit form, which today would be about 430 quid. The last advert I can find for it is in the March 1966 issue of Wireless World, where it was £15.15 for a kit or £21.14 assembled. That choice is the equivalent of about £375 or £520 in 2023. You see why the kit options were popular. On the front there's obviously the meter movement, with scales in both microfarads and microfarads. In other words, picofarads. There's a 4-position knob to select between 100 or 1000 microfarads and 0.01 or 0.1 microfarads. So in today's money, that's a full scale of 100 picofarads and 1, 10 or 100 nanofarads. Clearly it's not for reading the big stuff. Below the knob are the binding posts for connecting the capacitor under test. And to the left is the power indicator, and to the right, the on-off switch. That's all there is to see on the front. On the top is the carry handle, and around the back is the input for the power cable. That power cable I'm definitely going to replace. It's only 2-core on a metal cased meter, plus there's a burn in the insulation here, and it's on the line side too. Check out the plug on the end though. As you might expect on vintage gear, it's an older plug with no sleeves on the pins, but it's an unusual plug made by Walsall, and it's got a neon indicator built in. The indicator is built into the lid of the plug, which has contacts which press down into the fused and neutral connections on the lower half, and to make room for these in what is pretty much a standard height for a UK plug, the screw terminals have been flipped on their sides, instead of having the screws in the usual upright position. You get a better view now of the way the contact is set up. Does the neon still work? Yes, it does. Nice. Turning our attention back to the star of the show, there are 2 screws which hold the back on, and then once you take those out, you can draw the meter out of its case, revealing valves. 3 of them, in fact. Now this is where things get a little interesting, as although you'll see if you view the CM1 video that's also a 3-valve design, it's a different 3-valve design. The December 1963 issue of the Italian Lantenna magazine had a 2-page spread featuring the CM1U you see here. I've fed the whole lot through Google Translate, added extra info to the schematic based on what I found in the unit I've got apart, and generally cleaned up the document to come up with this version. As usual, there'll be a link to this doc in the video description. The assembly instructions for the CM1 also have a schematic, as you might expect, but bringing both schematics up together shows some differences. The CM1 uses a 6X5GT rectifier tube, an OA2 150V regulator tube, and a 6BX7GT double triode. The CM1U, on the other hand, replaces the rectifier tube with a selenium version, losing a valve, but swaps the 6BX7GT double triode for a pair of Mullard EL84 pentodes, gaining a valve. More subtle changes are the power switch, which is single pole on the CM1 and double pole on the CM1U, the power indicator, which is a filament lamp on the CM1 and neon on the CM1U, the transformer, which apart from the obvious voltage difference on the primary, uses a centre tapped secondary on the CM1 and a non-centre tapped on the CM1U, and the values of some of the resistors, 2 of which differ and 2 of which didn't even appear in either of the schematics, but I found them in this unit so I've added them in. The closest you'll get to a PCB is this 3-terminal tag board with the centre terminal earthed. Everything else is just wired point to point. Here's that selenium rectifier. It's a centre cell C2D contact cooled rectifier rated at 250 volts RMS, 60 milliamps. For comparison, here's a 1N4004 rectifier rated at 280 volts RMS and 1000 milliamps. The selenium rectifiers at a much higher internal voltage drop, and obviously that power would need to go somewhere, presumably hence the big metal case. There are date codes on the EL84s. One is etched RX2R3C1, the other RX2R3B4. So that's the first week in March and the fourth week in February 1963. They also have the letters KG on the yellow printing, indicating they were printed in July 1963, putting this unit at about 60 years old. There's not much else to see, and the manual and magazine spreads both explain the theory of operation. So let's change the power lead and see if it still works. Given its purpose, I expect those valves wouldn't have had much use compared to those in an old radio or a TV. Fingers crossed the caps haven't gone bad. My transistor tester reckons both the high voltage caps are around the 8 microfarad mark, but one has got an ESR of 3 ohms and the other around 76 ohms. Looking online, there are pages referring to reforming electrolytics by connecting to a high voltage supply through a resistor, and seeing as there's a 5k resistor feeding the high ESR one, it might sort itself out anyway. Guess there's one way to find out. There we go, replacement cable fitted, albeit with the original 2 amp fuse. This grommet here didn't actually offer any protection against the cable being pulled out. That protection was offered by the cable actually having a knot tied in it on the inside. So what I've done now is I've taken a spare cable gland and fitted that inside here on the cable so it can't actually pull out. This is a 3-core flex now, so the case is now earthed. Nice, but does it work? Now, as you saw a moment ago, the regulation is a little poor on this, and I'm wondering if it's down to those capacitors. As you can see, there's 14 volts of ripple on the output from the first capacitor, the one which is closest to the selenium rectifier. Now, whether that's normal, I don't know. But notice the voltage that capacitor is seeing. It's only 278 volts, not the 500 that the thing is rated at. So I should be able to go for a lower voltage capacitor, I think, which is just as well, seeing as the only 500 volt one I have is a little on the large side. But what I do have is a pair of low ESR capacitors, because I've tested them. There's this one, which is 450 volts at 10 microfarads, and there's this one, which is 400, come on, focus, which is 400 volts at 10 microfarads. Both have a very low ESR, lower in fact than the 500 volt replacements you can buy from RS, so which are not far off what we're getting in this thing already. So I think a recap is in order, just to see what happens. Before I do though, let's knock the big light off. And appreciate the glow. That high ESR cap is looking pretty crusty. So it's definitely seen better days and needed swapping out. The other one was pretty good. Will it work? Slightly less ripple. Only a touch. There's a little bit less ripple on that side. Let's take it back down. And check the other cap. This is once again all the way up to 250 volts. And that's down at 200. Turn it off and check the voltage at the regulator. Which is one resistor further along. That's at 200 volts. That's at 250. And we'll try it again with that capacitor. That's with the supply voltage of 200 volts. And that's with the supply voltage of 250. $250 and 200. So yeah, I think I'll let that settle again, because you're supposed to leave it for 20 minutes before, to warm up before taking readings, and we'll see how well it regulates after that. Well, it's been running for 20 minutes, and as you can see, the needle is a little bit on the bouncy side, but this is at 200 volts, the very lower limit of what it's capable of running at according to its design specs. If I take it up a little bit, it stabilizes. And through the rest of the range, it is rock solid. So I call that a win. Obviously it needs calibrating. Chances are the other capacitors are a bit long in the tooth and need swapping out as well. But I think that's a job for another day. One other thing of note with this, if I switch it off, just straight off, the needle drops to 0. Watch what happens if I slowly ramp it down. Did you know you could crash a 60-year-old meter? Now you do. It'll take either switching it back on or removing the capacitor to drop the needle. Anyway, hope you like that. Thanks for watching.